I'll tell you, a beautiful day like today, it's wonderful to see you all come out. And when I signed up for this, I had no idea that April 10th was going to be the week that was. Think about this. Baylor beating Notre Dame Sunday night in the women's. And then the next night we had the overtime game between Texas Tech and tell me. Virginia. Right. The Cavaliers of Virginia. Tonight is the last night of the NBA. Tomorrow, the Masters starts. The NHL ends this weekend, and the baseball season is going crazy. I'll tell you, who would have ever thought that the Mariners, the Seattle Mariners, and the Tampa Bay Rays would be right up there playing great ball. But as my friend Lou Perella reminded me, it's a long season. So we'll see what happens. We have a lot of Yankee fans here. We have Minnesota Twins fans. We have Red Sox. We have Mets diehards, and who knows what else. I know we do have a Cardinal fan here too, for sure. Anybody here over 88? Well, I sure like talking to all you kids because that makes it fun. About 2 months ago, I was channel surfing, and Carl Reiner had a wonderful program, so inspirational. He had all 90-year-olds on his program, like, Dick Van Dyke and Betty White and some others, and himself, of course. And he says, my idol was George Burns. And he says, I remember him saying, I get up in the morning, get the paper. If my name's not in the obituaries, I fix breakfast. Well, it's much the same with me. I get up, read the paper, my name's not there. I fix the coffee, and I read another chapter in the encyclopedia, the baseball encyclopedia. And I find such wonderful stories. When I hit 1926, I said, somebody has got to know this. So that's the basis. This is epic baseball now and then. The great thing about baseball is the hundreds of thousands of stories that come to a person. I have to tell you a couple personal stories. My daughter had a real good customer named Renee, and she said, Lori, my next door neighbor is a former baseball player in the major leagues. I'm not going to tell you who, but I'm going to have him send you his new book. And sure enough, in the mail came this book, Ned Garber, Through All Bases. And it's made out to Lori from Ned Garber. I said to Lori, I wonder if Ned Garber's still living. And we found out that he was by Googling. Yes, he's still living, and he lives in Bryan, Ohio. So I called up information. I said, do you have a Ned Garber? And they gave me his phone number. I called Ned. His wife answered and says, he's not in right now, but he'll be home at 4:30, and please call him. So I called Ned, and I immediately got his attention when I had mentioned I played ball in a semi-pro ball against one of his teammates that was a heck of a hitter. And he said, now who was that? I said, well, let me give you a clue. The year you won 20 games, he hit 21 home runs. I know who that was. That was Dick Kokas. He's a terrific hitter, terrible fielder. And so we started talking, and somehow or another, Satchel Paige came into the conversation. And he loved Satchel Paige, as did everyone that came into being with Satchel Paige. And he started telling me stories, and I cracked up on the phone. He told me the one story he raved about, and you probably all heard about the speed of Cool Papa Bell. Well, he told a story about, he says, Satchel was warming up in the bullpen, and he was called in a tight spot. The bases loaded and nobody out. And he says he was called in, and he kept the warm-up ball in his back pocket. So when he got on the mound, he started winding up, and he did his slow motion, big wind-up. He took the ball out, threw to third, picked the guy off, spun and threw the guy out at first, and the batter was so befuddled he struck out. I said, come on now. He says, that's just the kind of stories you couldn't shut Satchel up. He had stories that were just so Americana. And I'm going to tell you about another one because there's a gentleman in the room that also spent time in the bullpen with Satchel Paige and loved him. So that's a little bit about Ned Garver. Eldon Auker. Eldon Auker was an underhand pitcher because he hurt his shoulder playing football for Kansas State. And in doing so, he found out he could throw the ball underhand, and he was the first of the great submariners. And Eldon Auker wrote a book, age 90, called Sleeper Cars and Flannel Uniforms. It's out of print because Lori and I sold them all. We sold 400 copies of this book, and Eldon called me. I didn't call him. He called me. Mr. Glenn, how come you're selling so many of my books? I said, it's the best recount of baseball I've ever read. And I said, we tell our customers and they buy it. And he said, well, thank you a lot. And we started talking. He says, you know, he says, I pitched against Babe Ruth and I pitched against Ted Williams. And very few was able to do that, but he did. And he says, I became a teammate of Ted Williams. And both of them were friends till their day they died. And proof of that was on deathbed, Ted Williams talked to Eldon. He says, tell your wife she made the best fried chicken in the land. And that's how it was. He was one of two people invited to see Ted in his dying days. Ted was very embarrassed about his condition, but he loved Eldon Auker. So another story that I had nothing to do with was Bobby Thompson, as you know, ended up living here in Savannah, or right outside of Savannah, to be with his daughter. And he used to go to lunch. And one of our good customers came in this lunchroom, and it was very crowded. And this man was sitting alone at a table, and he says, come on over, sit with me. So he went over, and he didn't know who it was. He sat down, and they started talking. And he said, I'm Bobby Thompson. And he wanted to talk. So his 15-minute luncheon became a 3-hour luncheon, and they met once a month in this restaurant, I think it was Carrie Hilliard's, and talked baseball. And my point of all this is real people, celebrities are real people too. When you get somebody on a one-on-one basis, they're just like you and I. When they're in with a crowd, they change a little bit. Now, we want to talk about 1926. We want to talk about things that you have missed. You know, Dick Perez is my good friend. He's the artist for these various paintings up here. And he has a book out with 1,400 paintings called The Immortals. I'm not here to sell anything, but you can buy the book in my shop. So let me tell you, Dick has a statement in there that is so true. He says, if you paint from a picture, the viewer is being shown what he already knows. So he paints from recollections, and they're beautiful, as you can see. Each one of those has a meaning. The Mickey, Willie, and Duke, and you've got Bob Feller pitching to Joe DiMaggio, and of course the splendid Splinter. Well, Dick said, I paint from memory. And so I hope I can tell you, I hope you leave today with maybe one or two facts that you didn't know about. In 1926, the only media that there was by fellows like Damon Runyon and Grantland Rice and Haywood Broun and Ring Lardner. And they would have the recount of a game. And remember, all the games were played at 1 o'clock, so they were mostly over by 3. They would have to put their stories together. And the only way you knew what happened was from accounting in the newspapers of the game before, or by photo that might appear in the paper. If you wanted to know about the World Series, There's Times Square. Probably 50,000 people watching something, a ticker tape, come across. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So I want to tell you about some things that you missed in 1926. But I'd like to preface it first with 1925 and the big fella. The big fella, this book just came out. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. And someone is going to leave here today with this book. 1925 was a disaster. I have the stats up here to show you. When you come up at break time, take a look at this here, and you'll see why it was a disaster for Babe Ruth. He was rolling fast and hard in the early 20s. And in 1925, he showed up 256 pounds. He was gambling. He was womanizing. He was doing everything wrong, and he had a terrible, terrible year. It was capped off when he left spring training. It was reported that he ate 12 hot dogs and a gallon of beer, got on the train, and when he got to North Carolina, he was stricken. They even reported that the babe was dead. They finally got him to New York, and he had to spend 5 weeks in the hospital to recuperate. And when he came out, ornery as ever, he was late to the games, and Miller Huggins fined him $5,000. 1926, that's a lot of money. $5,000, he suspended him. And what was good about that was the owners stood behind Miller Huggins. Babe Ruth got on his hands and knees, literally, and begged him to come back. But it didn't save the season. He had a terrible season. He didn't hit 300. According to Babe Ruth's figures, that was very poor. So what's going to happen to Babe? He's washed up. His wife, Claire, said, "Babe, my goodness, you're only 29, going on 30, and you're not ready to retire. They're saying that you're washed up." So she says, "I'm going to take charge." She took the money. She made him dinner every night. She drove him to the gymnasium every morning. He got himself in beautiful condition, and he went. And as it happened, it was the greatest year overall that Babe Ruth ever had. But let's get away from Babe for just a minute and some of the other things that happened that we don't realize. The opening day of 1926 had the longest opening day game in history, and it still stands. And what's magnificent about it, it was Walter Johnson against Ed Rommel. You may know that Ed Rommel ended up being an umpire, but he was a great pitcher too. The Senators won 1-0. 15 innings, both pitchers pitched the entire game. 15 innings, complete game, 1-0. That had to be some game. This is the year of rookies. A rookie came up with 35 games to go, and he was only 17 years old. He hit .383, and that was Mel Ott. And as you all know, Mel Ott went on to a great, for our Mets and New York National Leaguers, Mel Ott was it. Also, a 19-year-old by the name of Satchel Paige came into the Negro League. Another thing that might seem unimportant, but it was a pivotal part of the year, was the National League installed the use of a rosin bag at the mound. Now, that might not seem important, but people were getting beaned, and they thought that this would help the pitchers control the ball a little better, and the American League adopted it a month later. On your programs, you're going to see some odd names, and you say, "Who dat? Who dat?" Emo Libson, Indians pitcher. He won 2 games. No big deal. He won both games in one day, in less than 3 hours. 2 complete games. He won 6-1 and 5-2. Emo Libson. For all of you that live on the computer, you might want to Google some of these names, and you'll learn a lot more about their careers. And these are names that You know, we had Babe Ruth and all these other, Ty Cobb and all these greats, but these are the unsung heroes. Who's Bob O'Farrell? Bob O'Farrell was the Cardinals catcher. He caught 146 games. He had the highest fielding average, and he had the highest, he had a high batting average of 293. He was the MVP in the National League. More about Bob O'Farrell in just a moment. The National League batting champion was also a catcher named Bubbles Hargrave, and he played for Cincinnati. He had a 353, and he beat out all the greats, the Wayner boys, and Jim Bottomley, and all these other Hall of Famers was beaten out by Bubbles Hargrave. The AL MVP, and here's something I'm sure you didn't know. The AL MVP that year was George Burns. He hit 358. And you say, you just told me that Babe Ruth had such a great year. Why not Babe Ruth? In those days, you couldn't be an MVP twice. And so the next in line was George Burns, where it should really have been Babe Ruth. Now, before we get into the big fella, let's talk about Pete. Grover Cleveland Alexander, named after the president, Grover Cleveland. I don't want to bore you with a lot of figures, but when I bring out a figure, it's because it's so dramatic. He won 373 games. He pitched 693 games, 437 complete. Again, when you see your chart on page 2, look at the complete games versus what they are today. It's astonishing. And there's a reason for it, and we'll get into that too. Pete Alexander did something that I don't think will ever be duplicated, and that is he won the Triple Crown in pitching 3 years in succession. That means he had the most wins, the most strikeouts, and the lowest ERA. 3 years in a row. Poor Grover Cleveland was an alcoholic, and he was also an epileptic. And he was washed up in 1926. He had a 3-3 record for the Cubs, and he was thrown on the trash heap. But Roger Hornsby said, I think he can help us win the pennant. For the pennant drive, they picked him up mid-August, and all Pete Alexander did was win 9 games. And they eked out the Cincinnati Reds to win the pennant, the Cardinals did. And for those that like the old movies, The Winning Team was the name of a movie, and it was Pete Alexander, played by Ronald Reagan. And if you can Netflix it or whatever, you ought to watch that movie about good old Pete Alexander. This revitalized him, and he won 21 games after he was washed up in 1927. But more later about Pete that is also astonishing. Let's talk about the big fella Babe. As I told you, he was overweight and everything, but he got himself back into shape, and he led in every single batting category except doubles and triples, and I mean every category. He hit 26 home runs more than anyone else, so he was dominating. Babe was back. So now, the Babe has had 3 careers. He had a pitching career. As you know, he won 108 games and lost 47 for the Boston Red Sox. I think it's still a record in winning percentage. So he had that career. And then the early 20s, he was lights out. He was doing everything he should. Then he went into that 1-year slump. And now he's rolling again. So Babe Ruth had 3 careers. Now, all this leads up to a World Series, and what a World Series it was. The Cardinals, as I said, eked out over Cincinnati, and they went into the World Series. Terrible underdogs. The Yankees won games 1, 4, and 5. Jesse Haynes, in the third game, he pitched a beautiful game, and he hit a home run himself for the Cardinals. But old Pete won games 2 and 6. And going away. So now it's 3-3. You know what that is. That creates Game 7. And in sports, there's nothing more exciting than Game 7. Incidentally, in Game 4, Babe Ruth hit 3 home runs, never done in the World Series before. And remember, no television, no radio. If some of these things happened today, you'd see it on ESPN every half hour or on the Major League Network. But there was no radio and there was no television in those. And the only way you could see it is through the newspapers or standing out there in Times Square. And this was a Yankee game, and that is the picture watching the series. Game 7, the Cardinals lead 3-2, and they're rolling right along. Haynes got a single off of Haynes in the 7th inning, and then he walked 2. He was tired. So what are they going to do? Hornsby went out, called time, went out to the mound, and he waves in old Pete. Holy man, he just pitched a whole game yesterday, and he won the game. Well, Pete was out in the bullpen sleeping off a all-nighter for celebrating the game before. But they called him in. Bases loaded now. 2 outs. And who's coming up? Tony Lazzeri. Tony Lazzeri hit 60 home runs the year before in the Pacific Coast League. He was a home run hitter. And so he's got to face Tony Lazzeri. Gets 1-1 on him, and then whammo, there it goes. Out of the grand slam, foul. It was a foul ball. Next pitch, strikes him out. Can you imagine this, striking out Tony Lazzeri with the bases loaded? The Yankees had that game won. A foul ball. 9th inning, 2 outs, Babe Ruth walks. Now, a lot of people don't realize this. Babe Ruth has stole home 10 times. Babe Ruth had 129 stolen bases. He was a pretty darn good base runner. He said he had to get to second base. So he goes and he tries to steal second base. And here comes Bob O'Farrell. Remember I said you're going to hear about Bob O'Farrell? The catcher throws him out. Series over. Game over. The Cardinals win. Ruth's great year is tainted by this blunder. On a personal basis, in 1926, 2 of the great pitchers of the era were Ted Lyons and Lefty Grove. I was 9 years old. My daddy's customer at the A&P said, I can't go to the game tomorrow. Here's 2 good tickets. They're in the front row behind the Red Sox dugout. So my dad surprises me, and we get on the streetcar, and we go down to Comiskey Park to watch a doubleheader. And who's pitching? Lefty Grove and Ted Lyons. And if you don't think a kid was excited about that, and that's where I met Ted Williams. He turned around and winked at me, and I said, from that time on, I'm a baseball fan. But Ted Lyons won the game, and he was known as Sunday Teddy. He was like 42 years old, but I was able to see 2 of the all-time greats. So that's 1926. And I think that was worth recounting because, as I said, these are facts that people don't know that happened in 26, a great year. And of course, you all know what happened with Murderers Row in 27. The Yankees were so invincible that the Pirates showed up to the World Series so scared they didn't know what to do, and the Yankees won 4 games in a row. Now let's get to 1941. And 1941 was much more than the 56-game hitting streak. But let's again preface this by the big 3 in baseball that in 1940. You had Bob Feller. He won 27 games, and incidentally, he pitched a no-hitter on opening day. My good friend Lou Perella and I hosted Bob at our shop, and we had dinner with him. And I said, Bob, tell us about that no-hitter on opening day. He says, that was no big deal. It was 40 degrees and nobody could hit. He says, ask me about the time I beat the Yankees on no-hitter in Yankee Stadium. And there it is. He pitched a no-hitter against the Yankees. So Bob Feller was very proud of what he did, but he wasn't that proud of that no-hitter. DiMaggio that year hit 352, hit 31 homers. Williams hit 344. great years had nothing, it didn't measure up to 1941. But it's much more than the 56-game hitting streak. Now, this is significant. Joe Medwick and Billy Jurgis kept getting hit in the head with pitches. So the Dodgers installed a thin liner in their caps. Some of you may remember that. And so the forerunner to the helmets was this little thin liner. Well, the Giants immediately turned around and they adopted it also. This is funny. The Cubs installed an organ to play, and everybody laughed. They said, "My God, organs are for funerals, not for ball games." As you know, all the ballparks have organs now. Frankie Frisch was manager in a doubleheader, and in the second game he was losing, and it started raining, and the umpires wouldn't call it. So he walked out to the mound with an umbrella. He was quickly thrown out of the game by the, but it inspired Norman Rockwell to paint that incident, and that painting just sold for $2 million recently of Frankie Frisch and the umbrella. So that was a funny thing that happened. There was a rookie that came up for the last 12 games of the year, and he went on to be a pretty good ball player. That was Stan Musial. He hit .456 in the last 12 games, and as you know, he went on the next 20 years, he was an all-star every single year. The Rookie of the Year, though, was somebody that was touted as the greatest player in the future. His name was Pete Reiser with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Do we have any Brooklyn Dodger fans here? This is surprising because Brooklyn is very popular at the shop. Anything that I have Brooklyn sells right away. But Pete Reiser led in runs, doubles, triples, average, slugging. He was destined for greatness. But nobody told him that walls were hard. And he used to run into the walls to the point that it did him in. He only had like a 6-year career. And there was many recountings that Pete Reiser was one of the great players of all time. Now, our big three in 41, Feller won 25 games. He had 260 Ks and 28 complete games. DiMaggio hit .357, and Williams hit .406. He really hit .412, but it's not in the records. Why? Because they didn't count sacrifice flies in 1941, and he had 8 of them. That would have raised his average to .412. This is not important, but it just shows you how fast time goes with all of us. DiMaggio would be 105 today. 105. And I remember when he passed away, it didn't seem that long ago, but 105 years old. DiMaggio started his streak on May 15th, and he was stopped by Jim Bagme with the Cleveland Indians. And then he went on to another 17-game hitting streak. So he hit safely in 73 out of 74 games. June 2nd, I'll never forget, June 2nd, Lou Gehrig died. The reason I'll never forget that date is that was my sister's birthday. And when we heard that Lou Gehrig died after that short, terrible illness, that is now named after Lou Gehrig. Mickey Owen caught 3 foul balls. No big deal. Oh, yes, it was in the same inning. It's never been done again. 3 pop foul balls, Mickey Owen, and you're going to hear a little bit more about Mickey in a minute. A little-known guy named Jeff Heath. Has anybody ever heard of Jeff Heath? No. Jeff Heath won the title of total bases. He had a heck of a year for the Cleveland Indians. He had 32 doubles, 20 triples, and 24 homers. And yet, nobody talks about Jeff Heath. The mid-year All-Star Game was very, very important. In 1941, the All-Star Game was still very big. I mean, people looked forward. They voted right, and it was really a big thing. Today, it's been sort of washed away. Some people don't want to go. But anyway, 1941, Archie Vaughan with the Pirates hits 2 home runs, and the National Leagues are winning, and they're going to win the game. And take it from me, this is documented. Ted Williams, to his dying day, said the biggest thrill of his life was he hit a homer with 2 outs and 2 strikes with 2 men on to win the 41 All-Star game. And that was his biggest thrill in the 1941 All-Star. Now the year ends with the World Series again, and the Yankees had lights-out pitching. Red Ruffing, Marius Russo, and Tiny Bonham held the Dodgers to 1 earned run. But in the 4th game, the Dodgers had a chance of winning. They were winning in the last inning, and with 2 outs, Tommy Henrich up. Now here's the funny part about this. Mickey Owen had the highest fielding average of the league. Hugh Casey was the best relief pitcher, and Tommy Henrich never struck out. Or he struck out very few times. So you have this picture, 2 outs, and as you all know, the dropped 3rd strike. And Henrich gets on, DiMaggio hits a double, next guy hits a single, and the Dodgers lose, and they lost the series 4 games to 1. Now the rest of the story. The dropped 3rd strike. The Dodgers were leading 4-3, and they lose the game. Hugh Casey on his deathbed said, "Poor Mickey Owen, that was not a pass ball. I threw a sinker, and it was a wild pitch." And here Mickey Owen was labeled for his life as the GOAT of the 41 World Series. You know, the poor Dodgers, they tried to beat the Yankees, and they couldn't do it until 1955. But here's a man, a great catcher, a great hitter, Mickey Owen, was tainted for the rest of his life. Oh, Mickey Owen, you mean the dropped 3rd strike. That was the thing. The year ended, as you know, with Pearl Harbor, 1941, December 7th. And this young pitcher who had won 52 games in the last 2 years, Bob Feller, is on his way to Chicago to sign what he thought was going to be a great contract because of his record. Turns on the radio in the car, and he hears that the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. He stopped the car, went back, and he enlisted. He was back, and he was in the Navy within 3 days. So here's a man, Bob Feller, and Lou and Audrey and I had a great feeling for Bob. He came to our shop, and we had a lot of good stories. But Bob Feller was one of the greatest ambassadors to the game of baseball. And 9 months before he passed, he called me, and he said, "Jerry, I want you to tell all my friends in Hilton Head," and he had 500, he signed for 500 people, "that I was more proud of my Navy career than my baseball career." And that's a true story. Now, 41 is finished. We're doing good. We're doing good. We want to talk about the minor leagues. The minor leagues, the building block of baseball. It started in 1882, and in 1949, after the war, there were 59 leagues, not 59 teams, 59 leagues. And that was one of the reasons was the Cardinals had a farm system second to none. They had, I think they had 29 teams scattered, D-ball, C-ball, B-ball, A, AA, AAA. In 1963, it dropped to 18 leagues. It's the long, hard road to the show. When you went into the minor leagues, there was one thing on your mind in those days: I've got to get to the show. And there's an old saying, advance or be gone. And I was reminded pretty soon about prospect or suspect. And that came right out of the horse's mouth that we're going to talk about in a minute. But there's some really great stories about the minor leagues. I think there were two categories of big leaguers. The person that is hell-bent to get into the major leagues, and the guy who loves to be top dog in their cities. A lot of us are fans of major league teams, and you could care less about the minors. Tell that to somebody in Charleston, or in Greenville, or in Nashville, or as in yesterday's Charleston paper, Las Vegas just built a $150 million park. And they said it rivals any major league park there is. And they're vying to get a major league team out there. But in these towns, some of these teams are outdrawing the Miami and the Tampa Bay team. They're averaging over 10,000 a game. The team right in Charleston gets 4,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 a night for minor league ball. So the minor leagues are very important, and they're doing very well. I recently had lunch with a newfound friend that lives in Sun City. He was a former Cardinal farmhand, and he worked his way from A-ball, Modesto, up to AA to Little Rock, and then the day he got the call to go to AAA Tulsa, he could hardly speak. He was so excited. But they sent him back to Modesto for a short. They couldn't find a spot for him because every time he had a spot to go, somebody was forced in, and no sour grapes. There's a lot of politics in the upper minor leagues. If you're destined to be on the majors, they're pushing you through. And he lost his job to somebody called, where's my Mets fan? Keith Hernandez. Okay. And on his team was Bake McBride, John Wackenfuss, Mick Kelleher, who became a very good friend. But this guy was a terrific hitter. He had a spring training that was so great that Joe Medwick, former Hall of Famer, or former Cardinal and Hall of Famer, presented our guest here today with this bat, Joe, as the best hitter in spring training. And he got the Joe Medwick Award. And that fella is right in the front row here, Alan Putz. Alan? There's a picture of Alan and his teammates up here. During our break, I want you all to come up here and see some of these exhibits, because there's, like I say, there are personal things, but there are things that you may not have known about, and I want everybody to take a pack of cards, and it's important. There's no Mickey Mantles in there. It's just a card to renew some of your memories. Okay, Alan played for 5 years in the farm system, and he was then released. As I said, he was a heck of a hitter. And he told me the other day, he says, you know, there's many games I hit 2 home runs. I don't remember those games. I do remember when I made a follow-up or an error. And he said, that stuck in my mind. He told me about in A-ball, you took buses. B-ball, you may take the train. And AAA, you took an airplane. Until the owner bought an old Greyhound bus and refurbished it. And he said those trips from Tulsa out to Denver or wherever, he said it was pretty long. The food allowance was $11 a day, and in 1963, that just got you through. So the biggest thing that Alan said as a minor league is when you're losing is to keep the desire. The desire is so important in the minors if you want to advance. He was lucky to play in the World Series against Pawtucket with Tulsa, and they murdered him. He said they came back with their tails between their legs. Pawtucket was far superior. So after 5 years in the trenches, he was released, and he became a high school principal for the next 25 years. He now lives in Sun City. So I'm glad that Alan is with us today. Now, I told you there's so many great stories in the minor leagues. The longest game ever played in organized baseball was 1981, Pawtucket against Rochester, 33 innings. Now, the unusual thing about this, the third baseman on each team are in the Hall of Fame. Wade Boggs got 4 hits and 12 times up. Cal Ripken got 2 hits and 14 times up. Next guy I want to talk about is pictured on your program, Buzz Arlett. I don't know if anybody has heard of Buzz Arlett, but to be standing in between Gehrig and Ruth, he must have been recognized. And I'll tell you why he was recognized. He played 20 years in minor league ball, and he wanted to get in the majors, and finally the Phillies brought him up in 1931. And he had a good year. I have a little note here. Buzz Arlett won 108 games and lost 25, and his arm went dead. So he went to be an outfielder, and what an outfielder he became. He hit 30 home runs and 360 batting average every year in that category. But he was brought up by the Phillies in 31. He hit 313. He had 18 home runs, and he ranked 5th in home runs. And the Phillies dropped him. They dropped him. So he went to AAA Baltimore, and that next year he hit 54 home runs. What's wrong with Buzz? He couldn't field. He was a poor fielder. And they didn't have DHs. Can you imagine a guy with a record like that with a DH? My goodness, he would have really been something. So Buzz Arlett is pictured there, and those two guys recognized Buzz as a great hitter. He was a big guy too, incidentally. Another guy that they rank as the second greatest minor leaguer was a guy named Ike Boone. He played 2 years for the Red Sox, and he hit 319. But he couldn't field. And in 1929 in the Pacific Coast League, now the Pacific Coast League, you probably didn't realize this, they played 200 games. You know, they started early and finished late. But he got 323 hits in one season, 218 RBIs, 407 batting average, and he hit 55 home runs. He had a lifetime average of 370 in 20 years in the minor leagues. Again, I have a question mark here. DH? Wow, would he have been one? Now, if at first, try again. Tony Koiniger. We all remember that name. He was with the Braves. He had an 0-9 record, a 9.59 ERA, and for some reason, the Braves bought him up, and he immediately won 7 and lost 2. The next year, he won 19. And the next year, he won 24 games. And Tony Koiniger is really well known because he's the only pitcher ever to hit 2 grand slams in one game. He hit 2 grand slam homers in one game. No pitcher has ever come close to that. In fact, only a couple players have done that. I think Fernando Tatis did it. So, another little incident, Pacific Coast Slugger. There was a slugger out in the Pacific Coast in 1933, went to his little brother and he says, "Hey buddy," he says, "why don't you come and play ball? You're a pretty good hitter." And he says, "Okay." So at 18 years old, he joined the Pacific Coast League. He hit in 60 games, straight 60 games. 61 games, in fact. His name was Joe DiMaggio. Vince, his brother, talked him into playing ball. And then Joe talked his little kid, Dom DiMaggio, to play ball. So that's the story of the DiMaggios. And finally, AAA Memphis. Here's a guy who hit 333, 68 stolen bases, 983 fielding average, brought up to the majors, got a hit his first time at bat. Pretty good for a one-arm player. Pete Gray only had one arm, and he was the player of the year in Memphis, but this is during 1944 when they were hiring anything because of the war. But poor Pete, after he got a good start, but it was amazing, he had the highest fielding average with one arm. From the time he was 7 years old, he learned to play baseball with one arm. Brent Musburger, the announcer for sports, was an umpire in the Midwest League. And April 18, 1946, a rookie in Jersey City, he had 4 hits, including a home run. The team won 14-1, and that rookie was Jackie Robinson. And today, this date, is the day that Jackie Robinson in 1947 signed a contract with the Brooklyn Dodgers. An outfielder in the Pirates system hit .244, hit 1 home run, 26 RBIs, quit and became governor, Mario Cuomo. And as you know, Mario's talked about that all the time, that the minors pretty rough hoed. If you think being governor is tough, you try to go through the minor leagues. That was one of his statements. So anyway, the minor leagues were a hard road to the show. Now, before we take a break, and we're right on schedule, I'm sorry that there's no Brooklyn Dodger fans here. There is one, I know. But how would you like to, have you ever heard of Happy Felton? Happy Felton and the Knothole Gang? Well, this young boy, he wrote to Happy Felton, and wouldn't you know, he got an invite to come to Ebbets Field. Holy man, what a deal. So he went to Ebbets Field with a special invite. Here's the invite. Happy Felton's Knothole Gang admit David Musial and one parent. So he went there, and lo and behold, who does he get a picture taken with? Jackie Robinson. Isn't this a wonderful picture? And Dave Musial is sitting right there. Yeah. Dave Musial is, Dave lives in Hilton Head, and Dave is known for not only Happy Felton, but Dave Musial's father was the artist for the Katzenjammer Kids. And Dave, in his own right, is an artist, and his works are all throughout the Low Country, whimsical little paintings. In like a Squat and Gobble, you'll see it, and in other places. So at a break, you come up here, talk to Dave. He'll tell you a thing or two about Brooklyn and everything else. Yep.
Jerry, just for the real fans, that Happy Felton thing was the invite was after there was a competition. I represented the town of Manhasset, and there was a kid from Great Neck and a kid from Glencoe, and we went down there and worked out. I fortunately was picked the best of the 3, and on the Happy Felton show, that the kid that won got to talk to anybody on the team he wanted to, and I, of course, as second baseman, I wanted to talk to Jackie.
Yeah.
What year was that, Jim?
That was 1953.
Yeah, so anyway, see, this is why baseball is so great. The stories, the underlying stories that come out of baseball, it's just super. Another thing I want to bring up is my former partner, and I talked to Lou Perella. You might all know Lou. He was the founder of Louis Sterling Carpets on the island. He's now retired and lives up in Charleston. But Lou and I were special guests to a cocktail party in Atlantic City. And it was celebrating the coming out of Don Mattingly, and all the Yankees were there. On a somber note, Lou and I had sitting at a table with the most healthy guy you'd ever want to see. It was Jim Catfish Hunter, and 9 months later he was dead. He had Lou Gehrig's disease, and he went like that, and we just couldn't believe it. But Joe DiMaggio was there to sign some special pictures. He wasn't at the cocktail hour, but the next morning when we went to the show, Lou was able to corral Joe because he had a friend that was in the wine business, and he mentioned to Joe, "I know so-and-so, and could I have a picture taken?" Joe didn't want his picture taken with anybody at that time. Little 6'2" Joe DiMaggio, strapping Joe DiMaggio, little guy. Lou is 6 foot here, and look, you can see how small Joe is. But reluctantly, Lou said, "Jerry, take my picture with Joe." And it was at the elevator, and it was all Joe could do to turn around. But after I took the picture, it was like somebody said they were a Mickey Mantle fan if they had their picture with Mickey Mantle. I've read stories where people actually broke down and cried when they met Mickey Mantle. He was so much in awe. Well, I have to tell a story on Lou. After I took the picture, when we walked away, he just couldn't believe I had my picture with a Yankee Clipper. I was so excited. And there's a picture you can come up and see. At that time, there's all kinds of stories about Joe. Okay, let's take a break. Let's take a 7th inning stretch. And I invite you all to come up and see some of these here exhibits. And then we're going to talk about how the game has changed, and some trivia, and some other things. So let's take a 10-minute, 15-minute break and have some fun. With the Tulsa Oilers, here's Allen's bat, presented by Ducky. Here's Lou with Joe.
I have a baseball song by Ted Williams.
Good. Oh, well, he was very proud of his autograph. And one of the telltale things, if you find him autographs, yeah.
And he was a big fisherman. And originally from Maine, he used to come up fishing in Maine.
Yeah.
Come up to
Yeah.
Minnesota too. And did you see the TV program a year ago on PBS, a documentary about Ted Williams?
Oh, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
What a word.
Yeah, yeah.
Saw him play with Minneapolis Millers.
Minneapolis Millers?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's where he started in San Diego, and he went up there, and
Yes. He's a speaker.
he what?
He needs a speaker.
Well,
No,
I don't
not
know
me.
of one.
Not me,
Yeah.
but there's a place in Sun City called the Athletic Club at the Low Country.
I've spoken to them.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, last year.
Okay.
At the
Lutheran Church.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Mine's Jerry.
Hi, Fred
Yeah.
Green.
Yeah. I'm glad you came out.
Very good.
Yeah. Be sure everybody take one. Yeah. And it'll renew memories.
Yeah, these are cards from when I was collecting.
I know it. How many of us gave away all those cards? For years ago, it'd be worth a fortune now.
I'll tell you what happened.
There's no rhyme or reason, but it'll renew memories.
In 1926, you were 9 years old?
No.
No, 1939.
1939.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say,
No. I'm 88.
Okay.
So,
All
yeah.
right.
I just was starting to tell him about the Eldon Orchid, the time that Babe Ruth almost killed, and I won't tell him who
Leo
it is.
Duro-
I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to tell him who it was.
Yeah, I can't get that book. If you go on, I'm going to announce that at the end. If you go on you know, with eBay, you might be able to get a copy of
That
it.
was the best book I've ever read. On
See?
baseball. It
See?
was an awesome book.
What year did your dad take it? Because you said it was 26, and I know it was.
No,
Was it 36?
no. I quickly said, and I want to tell you about Ted Lyons and Lefty Grove,
What year was that game?
1940.
40.
Yeah, I was 9 years old.
All right, that
Yeah.
sounds better. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was good. I thought that was in it was in 1994 or 90. I forget. It was in Atlantic City. It was a Yankee reunion.
Is this a new book?
It's brand new.
Because I read Jane's book on Mantle.
Yeah. Well, this is great because it's written by a female.
Well, I know.
And-
She's the one who wrote the Mickey Mantle book.
Yes, and this is signed.
Do you follow the recent baseball? You know about Chris Davis?
Chris who?
Chris
Chris
Davis.
Davis, for he's a slugger for the.
Oh, yeah, he's 0 for 49.
0 for 49, and last year he hit 168.
And he's getting.
Why did they keep him?
Yeah.
Howard? Because they gave him 161 million.
The Browns actually owned the ballpark, Sportsman's Park, and they had to sell it to Breeden with the St. Louis Cardinals, and then they moved out. And they immediately became popular in Baltimore. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I had mentioned earlier that Alan Poots spent some time in the bullpen because he was a DH, and he would be out there with Satchel Paige, who was a pitching instructor. And some of the stories, this cool Papa Bell was supposed to be the fastest human being ever. And you've heard stories about he'd turn out the light and he'd be under the covers before it would get dark. Yeah, that kind of stories. Well, there's a story where he was called out by the umpire. He was hit by a batted ball between first and second, his own batted ball. So I mean, these are the kind of stories that he would spin with Alan, and he wouldn't shut up. He had one story after another, just would go through, and as I said, everybody liked Satchel Paige. He pitched until he was about 62. He pitched a game for Miami in the AAA. Trivia time. Trivia, I quickly looked up trivia, and there's a two-word description of trivia. It's unremarkable matters. Unimportant matters. But we all like trivia. This not important, but Duke Snider, between 1954 and 57, he hit more home runs than Mays or Mantle. Okay? Nellie Fox and Reggie Jackson, they were both up 9,300 times in their career. Nellie Fox struck out 200 times. Reggie Jackson struck out 2,600 times. So that tells you what kind. Ted Williams said that Nellie Fox was one of the pure hitters of all time, and also Rod Carew. We'll mention that in a minute. Warren Spahn, everybody says Sandy Koufax, greatest left-hander ever. He was great for 5 years. Warren Spahn pitched 20 years, won 363 games, and just coincidentally, he got 263 hits. He was a good hitter, too. He won 20 games 13 times in a row. And his first home run was given up to Willie Mays. His last home run was given up to Luke Appling in the Cracker Jack game. And Audrey and I, incidentally, my wife of just 63 years, Audrey is in the corner here. I have to keep her awake. But Audrey and I met Luke Appling, and he said the greatest thrill of his life was hitting the home run in the Cracker Jack game in RFK Stadium. And he says, it wasn't the home run as much as I was on the Today Show the next morning. So that was a big deal for Luke. Rod Carew, 15 consecutive 300 seasons, 7 batting titles. In 1969, you won't believe this, he stole home 7 times. When's the last time we had a steal of home? I know this is trivia, but that is really something.
Yesterday.
Pardon?
Yesterday.
Oh, somebody steal home yesterday? Yeah, okay, but not 7 times. Incidentally, Rod Carew was the idol of our Alan Poots. And I asked him why. He says he was a left-hander and a good hitter. And he was a left-hander. The brothers, Ken and Cleet Boyer, in the 7th game of the World Series, they played against one another, and each one of them hit a home run. Cleet Boyer's homer won the game. Bobo Newsom, what a character. Yes?
The 7th game, Cleet Boyer's home run was irrelevant. The Cardinals won the World Series.
Yeah,
So
yes.
They didn't win the game. Ken
Yeah.
Boyer's home run might have won the game.
Yes.
But not Cleet's.
Bobo Newsom, what a guy. Played for the Washington Senators 5 different times. He won 211 games, but he lost 222. So anyway, he was the only 200 game winner with a losing record. This is a startling information. The longest complete World Series game still, 14 innings, pitched, complete game. The pitcher was Babe Ruth. He won 2-1. And that was in 1918. In 1947, the World Series, we had a near no-hitter, Floyd Bevins, pitching a near no-hitter, 2 outs. Floyd hadn't given up a hit, but he walked 10. Al Gonfredo made the sensational catch on Joe DiMaggio, and you see this often in newsreels. That was the only time Joe showed any emotion when he kicked the dirt at second base. But Gonfredo made that sensational catch. Cookie Lavagetto got a 2-base hit to break up the no-hitter. What's irrelevant about all that? The 3 guys, Bevins, Gonfredo, and Lavagetto, never played another game. That was the last game they ever played. Now, we do have a Brooklynite here, and we have a couple New Yorkers. And if you really want to feel at home, turn on the Major League Network at 1 o'clock and listen to Chris Russo. He'll drive you nuts, but he is New York and Brooklyn and everything else. And he talks fast. But he has some interesting things. He came up with a list, and I was so intrigued with it, I jotted it down, of the great memorable home runs. Not the greatest home runs, folks. Not the longest home runs, the most memorable home runs. And he started with number 10, Carlton Fisk, in the 6th game of the 75 World Series. You know, go fair, go fair. Okay, 61, Maris. Maris' 61st home run. That was memorable because it broke Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth had to be in there in the 1932, the called shot. Whether it was called or not, it was memorable, and it won the game. So that was a memorable home run. Ted Williams, All-Star Game home run, very memorable. Hank Aaron's 715th home run, memorable, but everybody knew someday it was going to be broken. Gibson, I'll tell you what, my wife was sleeping, and when that happened, I ran into the bedroom and woke her up. I said, "You'll never believe what just happened." When they called lame Kurt Gibson off the bench, he was actually in the clubhouse, told him to suit up, and he hit that home run against, of all people, Eckersley. That was a memorable home run. Joe Carter's walk-off, the second walk-off ever, The first we all know was Mazeroski. Now this one, you might say, oh no. But according to Chris Russo, New Yorker, the number 3 was Bucky Dent. And why? It was the tremendous rivalry. And Bucky Dent to hit that pop-up home run, that was memorable of all time. And then the number 2 was Mazeroski's home run. But a lot of people forget, Mazeroski won the game, but the homer in that game was by Hal Smith. He hit a 3-run homer to tie it up in this 8th inning. So, but Mazeroski's home run was memorable, of course. And of course, the number 1, it's year in and year out, voted the most exciting, memorable home run was the Bobby Thompson. And it was because of the circumstances surrounding it, they coming from way back and getting into the playoffs. So those are, you can argue the fact, but Chris Russo said that's his list of 10 most. So now we're to the game today. It's still 90 feet, still 60.6 inches from the pitcher's mound, but how the game has changed. It's 2 separate games today. You've got the DH game and you've got the regular game. And it changes the whole aspect, the National League versus the American League. And there's a movement to move the National League into a DH. When that happens, the game that we all grew up with is going to be changed. The strategy, you know, how many sacrifices do you see today with the DH in the American League? Very few. Replays. Honest to goodness, I heard on the Major League Network yesterday, they're talking about a possible strike zone call, computerized strike zone. That's terrible. You know, the umpires are human too, and that's part of the game. We don't want a computer to tell it is a strike or a ball. The relievers. Last year, Tampa Bay played around with an idea of pitching different pitcher every inning. And you know, this is brought to light in your second page, where the complete games is a thing of the past. The shift. The shift used to be for Ted Williams. Now it's for everyone. And the stats on our program, you can see some very dramatic stats. I highlighted 3. Most of all, the game has changed with analytics. You've got a bench coach, never had a bench coach before. That bench coach is on a computer, and he's measuring everything from a left-hander that was born on Good Friday to anything, to how you're going to pitch the next guy. It's really sort of pathetic. The analytics sort of started with platooning. Platooning was the first thing away from a traditional game, and that was brought into being by Casey Stengel when he took over from Joe McCarthy. And the Yankees hated it. They loved Joe McCarthy, and when Casey came in, but the Yankees started winning, and they won, as you know, with Casey at the helm, they were winning every year, and platooning was part of that. And he used his best advantage of players for certain things. The lefty-righty thing, that became big because somebody made a study that a lefty can't hit a lefty as well as a righty. And a lot of times the lineups are made lefty-righty, so forth. Tony La Russa was the master with the laptop. Tony never even looked at the game. He was there all the time. And Tony La Russa was a master at pulling pitchers at a certain time because he parted his hair in a different way. There was every reason in the world to make a move. As I said, the bench coaches. Honest to goodness, I have a book at home by Bert Sugar that tells the highest batting average of a player by Zodiac. Who hit the most home runs? That's an Aquarian. Honest to goodness, there are records. You talk about the U.S. government having figures. Baseball has more figures. I have 2 books this thick with nothing but numbers. It'll tell you everything that ever happened since 1888. The league, both leagues are considering the DH. There's strong movement for expansion into Nashville, Portland, or Las Vegas for 32 teams. There's a movement that a pitcher, no matter what, must face 3 batters. It's getting away from the traditional game, but if this is what they want, you know, when I worked for A&P, Sunnyfield butter was 19 cents a pound. I just paid $5.06 for a pound of Land O'Lakes. It's just the way it is. Folks, we can't live in the past. If this is the way it was, this is the way it's going to be. And the game is over, but let's sing the national baseball anthem. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back, so it's root, root, root for the home team. If I don't win, it's a shame. It's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.